The Puma is the newest glider by Avian. It's a high-performance king-posted glider with most of the performance of a topless, but a bit easier handling. At 28 kilos, the Puma is not only the lightest glider in its class, but it's also lighter than some of those in the class below. With its semi-elliptical planform and polyhedral, it's also probably the most beautiful. Let's go into the detail of how we do it. One of the first things everybody comments on when they see the Puma is the Kingpost. Now actually I think the Kingpost is one of the less interesting things about the glider, but let's get that out of the way first. Okay, so there's two good reasons why we have the Kingpost raked forwards the way we do. So the first reason for that is to do with the VG. Now the Puma is a high performance glider, so it needs to have a large VG travel. This means that between VG loose and VG tight, the leading edges of the wings are coming forwards and moving back quite a long way. Now when we're on the ground like we are at the moment, the wings are being supported by the top side wires which are supported on the Kingpost. The lower side wires are still just a little bit slack. Now this is VG full tight now, and you can see the side wires are still just slightly slack at that. Now that's very important, that's good for handling, to keep the wires slightly slack then. Now when I release the VG, what you see happen is the leading edges move backwards. Now because of the shape, so if you see as the leading edges move back, those wires come backwards and it allows them to go more slack. So now we have more slack in our lower side wires with the VG loose than we did with them tight. Now of course when you take off, the wing becomes loaded and the lower side wires become tight, the upper side wires will become loose. That's not a problem in itself, so having side wires with a little bit of slack in them on the ground isn't too much of a problem. The problem comes when you have side wires with loads of slack in them on the ground. It just makes the glider feel a bit sort of nasty to stand with when you're on launch. As I say, having slacker lower side wires is one consequence of having a lot of VG travel. Now there's a few things you can do to deal with that issue. So some manufacturers add sort of some complicated systems, maybe some extra moving parts in the Kingpost, maybe some extra moving parts around the junction of the lower side wires to try and get rid of that slack. We don't like adding those moving parts. It adds extra weight, it adds extra complexity, it's more things to set up. So a very simple way to reduce the amount that the wires become slack as you release the VG is just by tilting the Kingpost forwards. So you can see that the point around which the wires are moving is much closer to the point around which the leading edges are moving. So that means there's less difference. So the Puma is very nice in that it has still relatively tight lower side wires even when you're on the ground. The other reason why we have the Kingpost raked forwards the way it is to do with performance. So you can see that as the Kingpost tilts forwards, you're seeing less of it if you're the air, and so there's less frontal area, so there's less drag for that reason. The other reason is if you look at these two aerofoil sections, so on this side we have our speed frame upright section, which is pretty much ideal from an aerodynamic point of view. Here we have a Kingpost section. Now you can see the Kingpost section is a shorter section, and that means that it's a slightly less efficient aerodynamic section than our normal upright section. Now we can get around that slightly, that effect of it being shorter, by simply angling it so that effectively the cross section that the air sees as it cuts the upright is a longer section and is getting pretty close to the ideal shape like our speed uprights are. One final thing about the Kingpost as well while we're on the subject, you can also see that the front rear wire also only attaches part way up the Kingpost rather than to the top of it. That's purely for performance, so we've shortened the amount of wire which is exposed to the air, so reduce the drag by that amount. It's still strong and you can see from the geometry of the wires being in line, directly in line with the Kingpost. The Kingpost is still being loaded in compression, and those front wires are literally they're very lightly loaded wires, so there's no problem with having those shorter. The Puma's actually been on the load test rig up to 120 kilograms, so that's plus 6G minus 3G, so plus 6 times 120 minus 3 times 120. And at the minus 3 load test, of course, that's loading the Kingpost to the maximum. So we've tested the Puma to a higher load than it's ever going to get in normal free flight use. The reason for that is because nowadays everybody's interested in power units, particularly the nano trikes. So we're future-proofing the Puma to be able to check that it's able to take the loads that are required for those. So actually, one of the more interesting things about it is the shape of the sail and the cut and the way the leading edge is arranged. So quite an unusual feature. So this was taken directly from the Evo. Is that that you can see that the leading edge has a change in direction at around this point just here. So we've got a slight increase in sweep angle, and we've also got an increase in dihedral at this point. This gives the glider really nice handling, while still letting us fly with tight VG and good performance. One of the things that sets the Puma and also the Evo apart from lots of other gliders is the shape of the planform of the wing. So you can see, if you look along the trailing edge of the wing actually, the taper pattern of the wing changes as it goes along. This creates a more elliptical planform of the wing, and so a more elliptical distribution of lift over the wing, which is optimal for reducing the induced drag.
I hope you've enjoyed hearing about the Puma. We're really proud of what we've created here and think she's the best top-end king-posted glider around. High performance, great handling and lightweight. We met the full design spec with her. I'm going to fly off into the sunset now. Happy landings.
Ow.